going to start by way of introduction and just telling you a little story since we have an audience of an automobile industry here. When my father, who's a civil engineer, decided, when I was driving age and talking about getting my license, he decided I had to go first through his own personal driving academy. And what that meant was first starting with learning how to change a tire, learning how to use the gauges on the car, or read the gauges on the car, knowing your car was overheating. Then we went to level 2 where I had to learn, check the oil, lube and filter, had to learn about spark plugs and the gap on spark plugs, which I'm not sure is relevant anymore, and I'm not really sure why I needed to know that. And then it really got crazy in the final stage of sitting down and having him draw a piston and explain to me how a piston works. So I today still draw a piston for you. I can't really tell you what it does, but I do think that might have something to do with the fact that my first career was and schooling was around being trained to be a psychotherapist. I have a feeling those things are related. So many years later, I left my CEO position in education, as Ken spoke of, started a consulting business, was reintroduced to Christy Holt, the CEO and founder of Vibeonix. She told me about this crazy thing you could do, counting into a computer to give you a full emotional intelligence well-being assessment in 90 seconds. I thought that was the craziest thing I'd ever heard as a former therapist. Took the assessment, and the rest is history. I joined Vibeonix last January and have been now know something about voice technology, which I knew nothing about before, and so it makes a little more sense to how the whole thing works now. Kelsey, you can advance a slide. So I'm just going to talk, Ken talked a little bit about voice technology. I'm actually going to focus our session around you and how to check in spite of all the things going on around in your external environment, how to really, and I'm going to make the argument certainly that tuning in and getting more specific and clarity around how you're doing emotionally, which relates to your cognition and behaviors, and try to give you a little moment of reflection in this. You go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, back one. I missed it. So I want to talk a little bit about self-care and modeling the way. The two aspects, so we know as leaders, and I think many of you are in leadership positions that are in the audience today, we know modeling the way is one of the most effective leadership strategies that you can employ. And around that, I'm hoping to make the argument to you that it'll make a lot of sense in terms of modeling the way, which means leading by example, that partly starts with taking care of yourself, self-care, which improves self-awareness, which in turn improves emotional intelligence. And I think at this point, with all that we have going on around the country and the world, making the case for really further developing emotional intelligence, there really couldn't be a better time for that. Next. So we know with the current collective reality of what we're all dealing with that depression rates are up since the pandemic. We currently have COVID-19. We have social unrest that's creating issues of safety for people and of great concern. We have widespread fires currently, as well as hurricanes in Louisiana and Texas. So what all of that can do is create a feeling of uncertainty, great uncertainty, which all of us imagine have at some level, as well as really feeling out of control about what you can control for and what's happening next, really feelings of lack of safety. And I think one of the most challenging in the workspace, which hopefully doesn't happen to me today, is brain fog. That is one thing that we can all relate to has happened to us at one time or the other. So even the National Association of Mental Illness has said since the pandemic there's a pretty large epidemic now of loneliness due to isolation. So we'll talk a little bit about how you tackle that. Certainly people teams you're leading could be impacted by this, given the scale at which this is happening. We know there's a 35% increase of the number of youth that have showed up at the, to the ER for mental health reasons. Substance abuse has increased dramatically as well, and the suicide rate for youth since the pandemic, which is a great concern. We know alcohol sales are up at least 42% and made essential in my particular state when everything was locked down and with restrictions. We also know the other implications are things like COVID-15, equivalent to freshman 10, which some of us have experienced, though Ken actually has lost weight, so you'll have to ask him how exactly that happened. Next. You can just go to the next one. I'm going to try to speed up here for time. So what I want to just talk about briefly is how to improve self-awareness, which is the key, around getting beyond I'm stressed and tackling with greater specificity what's happening for you. We all talk about and feel comfortable saying I'm stressed, but if you've ever gone to counseling, had a coaching session with somebody, even supervisors have probably all had a conversation with you at some point to say, well, tell me more about when you say I'm stressed, what that means, so that we get a greater understanding with greater specificity of what that looks like and sounds like from you, because stress to me and stress to you are very different things. So part of it is in becoming more self-aware and building stronger emotional intelligence is the need to get more granular with greater specificity around your emotions beyond I'm feeling stressed. Next. Next up. So I'm just going to, the definition of emotional intelligence. I just want to focus on a couple pieces here, which is just the monitoring and understanding, because that's the key to developing greater self-awareness, and it is the first step to certainly strengthening emotional intelligence. Next. So I just here's one example. We're going to do this old school, very manually, not electronically, in terms of the assessment. We look at emotions. There's 20 different emotions. Those are very similar if you look at emotional scales. On the left-hand side of this scale, you'll see the higher vibration scales, which are detected from patterns in your voice as you're counting. So in this case, on the left-hand side, those are higher vibration scales that you would consider more positive, certainly happiness, ambition, courageous, any of those that you see on there. So one thing to think about is, where am I strongest? What's the strongest emotion on that high vibration that you're experiencing right now? If you look on the right-hand side of that scale, those are emotions of lower vibration that are really more restrictive. So if you look at anger, you look at despair, fear, for example, obviously those are emotions that are less comfortable. But part of the challenge here is really getting more specific beyond I'm stressed in terms of what that means. I'll tell you a quick story about my friend Wayne, who's a CFO, and he took this assessment, and I had a call with him, of course, in his living room because we're on Zoom. And his wife came in and said, so Lindsey, his loneliness score is really high. We haven't spent a day apart since COVID begun. And I'm right here, how could he possibly be lonely? So it was a great way, and this is a really great example of what I mean about needing to label that emotion and get more granular first. So before I said anything, he said, look, I'm a B2B CFO. I've helped tons of startups. I'm meeting with different people. I'm in different people's companies' offices every week. We're having coffee with them, looking over their finances. I'm an extrovert. I feel isolated. I do feel lonely. It has nothing to do with my relationship with you. So I think that's a really great illustration of what's happening for us and the overall anxiety and stress level being higher in general in the population. And then you're going to have specific people that you interact with if it's not you that also needs to take a closer look at how you're doing and, more importantly, how you're responding. Can you go, just because I'm going to try to speed this up a little, Kelsey, just go a couple ahead. Just one more. Thanks. So stress habit is the other way that we take a look at this, right? There's your emotions, how they affect your cognition, as well as how they affect your corresponding behaviors. So with stress habit, the way to make sense of this, you've all heard of sort of the fight or flight syndrome. So in terms of how you're doing right now, this is the other piece to ask yourself is, how am I responding to stress, and am I activating old habits that aren't really the healthiest for me? So if I'm avoiding stress and avoiding uncomfortable emotions I'm experiencing, that eventually becomes symptomatic of health problems, sleep issues, et cetera, physical issues. If I'm engaging, that means I'm addressing it, I'm tackling those emotions and moving forward with it. And engaging is a much higher vibration pattern that is picked up than avoidance is, so it obviously corresponds in that way. So it's a matter of really tuning in, getting more specific and granular about how you're feeling related to building out greater self-awareness, and of course incorporating strategies that are positive habits, healthier lifestyle, so that you can reduce your stress level and ultimately you can reduce illness, which would be really the goal in that. Kelsey, you can just go 2 ahead. So last, I'm just going to wrap it up to say, I hope quickly in this very few minutes, I made the case to you to take stock, to look more closely, to look at how you can improve self-awareness as a vehicle to improving emotional intelligence. I think it's fair to say that it's one of the most important skills that we need to build and have capacity to build in others at this point in order for us to work through and manage the stressors that are in our external environment. And last, I would say, hopefully I've also made the case that if you're in leadership positions or just a part of a team, modeling for others and showing them the way and setting that course and being the example of what you want to see in self-care of others, I think is critically important right now.